Everyone in the circle knew that I had been infatuated with Victoria since childhood. As her devoted admirer, I always catered to her preferences. She liked black, so I gave her black stockings. She liked foreign languages, so I gave her French polka dot socks. She liked flower arranging, so I gave her floral-patterned stockings. Despite my efforts, she ran away on our wedding day to save her old flame. 20 years of childhood friendship turned into the biggest joke. I wore a suit worth millions and carried stockings worth billions, bearing all the burden alone and completing the grand wedding by myself. While everyone waited to see me as a laughingstock, I laughed the loudest. What a foolish woman. There are plenty of women out there, and I could easily find another to wear stockings for, but there is only one business empire. I wasn't just after her body, I was after her money too. Victoria's plane had already taken off. I locked myself in the lounge and forced out a tear. My irate father was cursing outside the lounge, and Uncle Liu was angrily making call after call, determined to bring Victoria back as soon as she landed. There were 2 messages on my phone. Victoria wrote, "Sebastian, wait for me. I will give you an explanation." The other message was a photo of Victoria walking towards the boarding gate, anxiously talking on the phone. She was wearing the mermaid dress that I had painstakingly designed with the designer. The jewelry and headpiece I had carefully selected were loosely hanging from her hair. Her gentle eyes were full of love, as if she was softly speaking to the person on the other end of the phone. Anyone who saw it would sigh and say, "The man she loves is truly lucky." I enlarged the photo and looked at it carefully for a while. I was really reluctant to let go. However, I gave her a chance, and she made her choice. One must live with their decisions. I washed my face, tidied up my appearance, and walked out of the lounge in my suit with my head held high, smiling at the elders outside the door. I said, "The wedding will proceed as planned." Victoria returned 3 days later. During those 72 hours, I was the undisputed center of attention. The media, both big and small, were all discussing how Sebastian, the eldest son of the G family, was abandoned by the bride on his wedding day, but still insisted on completing all the complicated wedding procedures alone. Some lamented the coldness of the wealthy, some sympathized with me, and naturally some took pleasure in my misfortune. Regardless, my name appeared before Victoria's for the first time in the overwhelming news coverage. To apologize to the G family, my father-in-law, Chairman Liu, personally hosted a banquet to make amends. As the atmosphere became more congenial, Chairman Liu raised his glass to me and said, "Sebastian, this toast is for you. You truly are old G's son. Thank you for making a decisive decision, considering the bigger picture and preserving the dignity of both our families. The Liu family owes you an explanation." I humbly raised my glass, but before I could speak, the door of the banquet hall was pushed open. Victoria walked in, looking haggard. My father saw her and his face darkened. He heavily put down the glass he was holding in mid-air. The large banquet hall fell silent. Chairman Liu glanced at my father, gritted his teeth, and scolded Victoria, "Kneel down." Victoria walked step by step to my father, lowered her head slightly, and softly said, "Dad, I was wrong this time." My father snorted coldly and did not respond. However, in the next second, Victoria placed a document on the table. She raised her chin and proudly said, "But I also brought back the contract. This time I went to the United States as the daughter-in-law of the G family and signed the cooperation agreement with the Byron Group on behalf of the G Corporation. The GI Corporation had been striving for this cooperation with Byron for half a year. All the details had been finalized, but Byron had been reluctant to sign. The G Corporation had tried various ways to find a breakthrough, but to no avail. My father had been so worried about this cooperation that his hair had turned white. I had to admit, Victoria knew how to win hearts. This contract was a great achievement for the G Corporation. My father was choked with emotion, unable to face Victoria with either a stern or a welcoming expression. Victoria stood in front of my father with her head lowered, her lips slightly curved, looking elegant and composed. Chairman Liu breathed a sigh of relief and led the applause, saying, Old G, how about it? My daughter is not bad, right? She helped you secure Byron in one fell swoop. It's time to reward her." After the initial awkwardness, the people at the table also began to applaud, and the atmosphere gradually became lively. However, Victoria had caused such a great embarrassment to the G family. Did she really think it could be easily forgiven? I frowned and walked up to Victoria, looking her up and down. I said, "Victoria, why are you still wearing the dress from the wedding day? Were you too busy taking care of Mr. Ethan to change? Or is the wedding dress more convenient for you to take care of him?" The banquet hall suddenly fell silent. Victoria's smile froze on her face. I forced a smile and put my arm around her shoulder, leading her out while saying, all right, go home and take a bath, change your clothes, and rest. Don't worry, I'm here." Behind me, I heard a heavy thud on the table. Without turning around, I knew it was my father. Chairman G's voice rang out, "Stop, you're not going anywhere." In the midst of the standoff, a thin figure rushed in from outside the door, standing between Victoria and me. He said, "Don't make things difficult for Victoria. It's my fault, all my fault." The person who came was none other than Ethan, the one who caused Victoria to run away from the wedding. Ethan trembled as he bowed to apologize, almost falling to the ground. In front of everyone, Victoria clung to him, holding his arm to support him. She said with a pained expression, "Didn't I tell you to wait for me in the car? Why did you come up? Are you feeling unwell?" Ethan's face was pale and he looked pained yet somewhat heroic. He held Victoria's shoulder and said, "Victoria, don't argue with Chairman Lou because of me. It's not worth it. I don't have long to live and I can't leave you with a mess." Before he could finish, Ethan started coughing violently. Victoria frowned, and without a word she struggled to support Ethan and started to walk out without looking at anyone else. She said, "Ethan, it's okay, I'll take you to the hospital." But the next second, Chairman Lou's stern voice called out, "Victoria, stop right there." Chairman Lou was furious. He shouted, "If you dare walk out of this door, everything in the Lou family will have nothing to do with you." Victoria stopped and turned around, looking coldly at Chairman Lou. She bit her lip and said, "My biggest regret is not stopping you from sending Ethan abroad back then. Do you think you can control me like you did before?" Chairman Lou's face turned ashen, but he couldn't utter a word. My father shook his head and said, "Old Lou, it seems you can no longer control the Lou family." Victoria glanced at my father and rolled her eyes, saying, "Uncle, isn't it enough that I came back to see you and Sebastian instead of immediately taking Ethan to the hospital? Some words are better left unsaid." She turned to me, her eyes cold, and said, "Sebastian, I agreed to marry you, and I did. I'm Mrs. G now. You might be proud of that, but love is something you can never force. Don't ever dream of it." With that, she supported Ethan and walked out without looking back. Ethan, leaning on her shoulder, turned his head to look at me, a slight smirk on his lips. In front of everyone, I angrily crushed the glass in my hand, and blood dripped onto the white tiles. Victoria and I had grown up together, as close as childhood sweethearts. I had always followed her lead, liking whatever she liked. I had no hobbies of my own, her hobbies became mine. The businesses of the G and Lou families had been intertwined for generations, so our marriage was a foregone conclusion for all the elders. The only surprise was when Ethan, a scholarship student, transferred to our class in our sophomore year of high school. He was like a beacon in a storm, warm and resilient, easily sparking Victoria's affection. However, Chairman Lou quickly sent Ethan abroad despite Victoria's strong protests, severing their contact. Victoria became cold and distant, and when she agreed to our marriage, I asked her what she would do if Ethan returned. She looked at me with twinkling eyes and said, "That was in the past. I didn't know what love was back then. I just want to be your wife, Sebastian." Our kiss from that day seemed to linger, but soon everything changed. I rarely lost my temper, but seeing me like this was harder for my father to bear than killing him. My mother rushed over to help me with my wound, while my father, disregarding decorum, erupted at Chairman Lou and then left with me, taking the Byron contract with us. Victoria never contacted me, and I learned about her and Ethan through my informants. Ethan had cancer and refused to be hospitalized, insisting on staying in the apartment that was supposed to be mine and Victoria's marital home. Surprisingly, Victoria didn't refuse his outrageous request. Zachary was furious, pointing at me and shouting, "Sebastian, aren't you angry? You're being humiliated." I laughed and said, "Angry?" I paused my work, placed my hand over my heart, and felt for a moment. A little sad, but not much. Seeing Zachary fuming, I patted his shoulder and said, "The Byron contract has reached its first payment milestone. Money is 100 times more important than women, brother." Zachary spat at me and retorted, "Stop fooling yourself, Sebastian. You and the Liu family could shake the whole circle with a stomp." Seeing him about to faint from anger, I thought for a moment and reassured him, "Don't worry, this isn't over. Ethan will come looking for me soon." As I expected, Ethan couldn't hold back and sought me out at a cafe near the G Tower. I carefully scrutinized him and said, "Ethan, you look good. My wife must be taking good care of you." Ethan extended his hand to me and said, "Mr. G, does this look familiar? The Liu family's heirloom ring. If I remember correctly, it was given to you on your engagement day. You treasured it, wrapping it carefully and storing it in a cabinet. But now, here I am, playing with what you hold dear. You have nothing but your birthright. Other than that, you have nothing. I, on the other hand, have everything you don't." Looking at Ethan's arrogant demeanor, I found it amusing and said, "Ethan, congratulations on your dream coming true. But there's a detail you might have overlooked. Let me remind you." I paused and continued, "Who do you think revealed our wedding to you? Who gave you Victoria's phone number, which you couldn't reach for 10 years but suddenly could?" Ethan was stunned, looking at me in disbelief. He stammered, "It couldn't be you, right? Are you crazy?" Leaning back in my chair, I smiled at him without saying a word. Ethan stared at me for a long time, his eyes starting to waver. Ethan panicked. He asked, "Sebastian, what exactly do you want?" I laughed and replied calmly, "Ethan, isn't that obvious? I want to protect my family and my beloved wife. I've been pursuing Victoria for over 20 years. How could I possibly hand her over to you? You need to put in more effort." Furious, Ethan picked up the coffee cup on the table, ready to throw it at me. I took out a document and handed it to him. Seeing the words on the document, Ethan's face turned pale. He stammered, How do you have this?" I smiled, put on my coat, and said, "Ethan, I won't set you free. We'll see who wins." A few days later, I attended Charles's 20th birthday party at the invitation of the Zhang family. As soon as I walked in, I saw Charles punch Ethan in the face. With a loud thud, half of Ethan's face visibly swelled. Charles, evidently furious, grabbed Ethan by the collar and threw him to the ground. As he moved to hit Ethan again, Victoria's voice rang out, "Charles, why are you hitting him?" Charles stopped and turned to look at Victoria, anger burning in his eyes. He adjusted his custom-made suit, which had lost a row of buttons, and said through gritted teeth, "Victoria, I invited you to my birthday party, and you bring this guy to ruin it?" Clearly it was Ethan's doing. Charles was the youngest son of Chairman Zhang, with 3 older sisters. Being the youngest, he was doted on from a young age. He started acting at 16 and by 20 had swept all the major awards in the entertainment industry, becoming the youngest and hottest actor. He had never suffered such humiliation. Before Victoria could say anything, Ethan got up from the ground and pushed Charles away, shouting angrily, "Stay away from my woman! You're just trying to get her drunk. We're all men here. We know what you're up to." Charles, exasperated, said, "Are you crazy?" I toasted everyone. Ignoring him, Ethan turned to Victoria, his face bruised, and said, "Victoria, I understand. Not only did I fail to protect you, but I also caused you trouble. I don't have a distinguished family background, nor do I have time to build a career like Mr. Zhang. Everything I suffer, I deserve. I understand." Victoria, heartbroken, rushed into his arms, comforting him like a tender bird. "Fool, you are forever the warmest harbor in my heart." Ethan, with eyes full of affection, said, "Really? I also want to act like Charles, win Best Actor, drive luxury cars, live in a mansion. Will you support me, Victoria?" Right then, Victoria made a phone call and instructed her staff to start an entertainment company to support Ethan's acting career. Watching this farce from a distance, I couldn't help but find it laughable. People ultimately are trapped by what they couldn't have in their youth. The once proud swan, Victoria, was now being pulled down from her pedestal by Ethan without any suspense. Victoria gradually became a joke in our social circles, and naturally so did I, her unfortunate husband. Ethan had taken over her life completely, attending every banquet and event with her. After several of Ethan's outbursts, everyone in our circle knew to keep their distance from Victoria. The next time I saw Victoria was at a press conference for a major government project that the G and Liu families had jointly secured. Since the elders had gradually retreated into the background, Victoria and I, as the heads of our respective groups, had to attend. While waiting backstage, I noticed Victoria was alone. I asked, "Mr. Ethan isn't here with you today?" Victoria looked at me, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. She bit her lip and said, "He's filming with the crew." A few months after she told me not to expect any affection from her, Victoria was smiling at me. She seriously said, "Today's event is very important. Of course I should accompany my husband." I stepped back to maintain a proper distance and said, "Miss Liu, in this context, it's more appropriate to address me as Mr. G." Her smile froze. She stepped forward and struggled to say Sebastian. Just then the host invited the guests to enter. I ignored the emotion I couldn't decipher in her eyes, nodded to her, and walked into the venue. The press conference was live streamed. After sitting down, I suddenly thought of a question and turned to ask Victoria, "Ms. Liu, does Mr. Ethan know we will both be attending this event?" The host's voice was loud, so Victoria slightly turned her head to hear me better. Just as I finished speaking, Victoria's phone on the table started vibrating. The host announced the start of the press conference, and the city official began his speech. Victoria hesitated for a second before hanging up the call. For the next 5 minutes, as the city official spoke, Victoria's phone kept vibrating. Glancing at the screen, I saw Ethan's name flashing repeatedly. Turning to Victoria, I smiled and said, "Your relationship is really enviable." Victoria pursed her lips but didn't say anything. After the speech, it was time for the winning company to give their statement. As the live camera focused on me, I stood up, but having sat too long, my legs were numb, causing me to stumble towards Victoria. Instinctively, Victoria got up to steady me, tightly holding my arm. I patted her hand and said with a smile, "Thank you, Ms. Liu." Victoria was stunned. She stared at me in a daze until I withdrew my hand with a smile. Just as I was about to start my statement, a staff member rushed in and whispered to the host. The host quickly reported to the city official, who then agreed to connect to a live feed. Ethan's figure appeared on the screen standing on a rooftop. He shouted, "Victoria, why didn't you answer my calls? Why did you go to Sebastian? He was smiling so happily at you. What did you say to him? Why? Why do you have to force me to resort to this to see you?" The camera focused on Victoria. She stood up, staring at the screen, and responded, "Ethan, I didn't say anything. I had no choice but to come today. Please don't be impulsive. Come down, okay?" Ethan was hysterical. He shouted in anguish, "I don't believe you. You're the heiress of the Liu family. If you didn't want to do something, who could force you? You wanted to see Sebastian, didn't you? You've been with me since your wedding, but you miss him, right? You even helped him, let him touch your hand. Have you no shame?" Victoria, feeling wronged, pleaded, "Ethan, I didn't. Please come down. I'll come to you now, okay?" Ethan, his voice breaking with emotion, yelled, "No, unless you prove it to me." "Yes, slap Sebastian. If you slap him, I'll believe you haven't been unfaithful." Victoria glanced at the city official beside her, whose face was already dark with anger, not even sparing her a glance. Finally, Victoria couldn't hold it in anymore. She screamed hysterically, "Ethan, stop this madness!" With those words, Ethan snapped. He rushed down from the rooftop, got into his car and sped towards the crowd. There were many spectators, and some couldn't get out of the way in time. We could only watch helplessly on the screen as people were knocked to the ground. Ethan didn't stop. He drove away quickly. By the time we arrived at the scene, emergency services were already there. The scene was chaotic, with injured people lying everywhere and blood stains all around. I quickly arranged for staff to open all the trailer doors and help the lightly injured inside to rest. While busy, I heard Victoria's phone ring. Ethan's desperate voice came through. "Victoria, save me. The car crashed into a tree. I'm stuck and bleeding badly. I want to see you." I looked over. Victoria was busy helping the injured, so she had put her phone on speaker. Hearing Ethan's words, she immediately stood up and anxiously asked, "Ethan, where are you? I'll come to you right away." She started to walk out while speaking. I sighed and called after her, "Victoria, you can't leave in such a serious situation. The film company is a subsidiary of the Liu Group. If we don't handle the aftermath properly, it will severely damage the Liu Group's reputation. You must stay and take care of it." Maybe hearing my voice, Ethan became more frantic. He continued to plead, "Victoria, I might never see you again. I love you. If I die, please forget me." Victoria hesitated, her eyes full of pain and struggle. After a moment, she bit her lip, pulled up my sleeve, and choked out, "Sebastian, please, take care of this for me, okay? Ethan is in the late stages of cancer. He doesn't have long. I'll repay you, I promise." Before I could respond, Victoria turned to leave. I called after her with a smile, "Victoria, do you know what my nickname Seb means?" She paused for a moment. Maybe she heard me, maybe not, but she didn't turn back and walked away. I sighed, muttering to myself, "It's the time of small fullness when crops begin to mature. The harvest season is coming." This incident had a severe impact. Victoria's act of deserting the scene was filmed by onlookers and posted online, causing even more trouble for the Liu Group, already at the center of public scrutiny. I worked tirelessly for 48 hours, as Victoria's husband and the representative of the Ji and Liu families, overseeing the situation, comforting the injured, and offering a feasible compensation plan. When I finally finished handling everything and dragged my exhausted body out of the Liu Group building, I was startled by a figure at the door. It was Victoria. Her eyes were red, her face tear-stained, looking like she was about to break. She choked out, "Sebastian." Her hoarse voice was almost inaudible. She continued, "Sebastian, Ethan was arrested. My father had a heart attack from the shock and is still in the ICU." I looked up at the sky, the first light of dawn breaking through the darkness. I said to her, smiling, "Victoria, look, the sky is getting brighter." Chairman Liu finally regained consciousness, and Victoria and I rushed to the hospital. His hair had turned half white. Seeing Victoria, he closed his eyes in disappointment and turned his head away. Victoria's mother, her eyes swollen from crying, took my hand, tears falling again. Before Victoria could speak, her phone rang. She hesitated, then put it on speaker. The voice on the other end said, "Hello, is this Miss Victoria? Mr. Ethan is in our custody. He insisted on seeing you and attempted to bite his tongue to commit suicide when we refused his request. We caught him in time, so he only has minor injuries." Before the person could finish, Victoria had turned and run towards the door. Her mother cried out, "Victoria, come back!" But Victoria hesitated only for a moment before opening the door and leaving without looking back. Chairman Liu, in pain, closed his eyes, a tear sliding down his cheek. Standing beside them, I felt the atmosphere grow awkward. Just as I was about to leave, Chairman Liu's assistant rushed in, out of breath. "Chairman, we have a problem," he said. Reflexively, I grabbed him and asked, "Assistant Chen, what's wrong? Speak slowly." Catching his breath, Assistant Chen looked at Chairman Liu lying on the hospital bed, deathly pale, and hesitated. Chairman Liu waved his hand weakly and said, "It's fine, speak up." Finally, Assistant Chen carefully said, "We just received a notice from the city government. They are very dissatisfied with Victoria's performance in this incident and are demanding that the Liu Group withdraw from the project or replace the general manager before reconsidering. Mrs. Liu stood up abruptly, panic-stricken. Chairman Liu lay on the hospital bed, gasping for breath, the blood pressure monitor beside the bed beeping frantically. I quickly pressed the service bell. Before the nurse arrived, Chairman Liu couldn't catch his breath and passed out. He had a stroke. Thanks to timely rescue, his life was saved, but half of his body was paralyzed and he would spend the rest of his life bedridden. Victoria rushed back from the detention center upon hearing the news, only to be met with the decision to replace her as the general manager of the group. The replacement was me. She stood outside Chairman Liu's hospital room for days, but he refused to see her. One late night after finishing my work, I was too exhausted and decided to spend the night in the office. Just as I turned off the lights, my phone buzzed. It was Victoria. After a moment of hesitation, I answered. "Victoria," I said. The other end was silent. I called her name again. Victoria must have been crying. Her voice, like a mist in the night, choked out, "Sebastian." I brought back the ring and put it back in its place. "It's been days. Why haven't you come to get it?" Not wanting to upset her, I carefully replied, "Victoria, you know I've never used anything that others have used since I was a child." She was silent for a long time before I heard her self-deprecating laugh. In a sorrowful tone, she asked, "Does that include people too?" I didn't know how to answer, so I just hummed in response. It was late, and perhaps because I hadn't hung up, Victoria found an outlet for her emotions. She laughed and cried on the phone, saying, "Sebastian, Ethan lied to me. He never had cancer. He used it to gain my sympathy. No wonder he refused to go to the hospital and insisted on staying at home. It was during his medical examination in the detention center that I found out he wasn't sick at all." Victoria's voice broke as she cried, "Sebastian, I regret it so much. I hated my father for years because of him, missed our wedding and hurt you. After all this, I realize you're the only one who has always been good to me." As she spoke, I listened quietly, the gentle night breeze blowing in through the window, reminding me of the night Ethan was sent abroad by Uncle Lou. Victoria took her anger out on me, throwing tantrums at every turn. But I worried about her, picking her up from bars late at night when she drank too much. That night the breeze was gentle, just like tonight. I stood outside the private room hearing her friend ask, "Victoria, Sebastian looks so pitiful searching for you every day. If you don't like him, just tell him and let him give up." The breeze was so gentle. Victoria replied, "If it weren't for the arranged marriage with Sebastian, Ethan wouldn't have been treated so unfairly. Ethan suffers abroad while Sebastian enjoys himself. I won't just marry him. I'll swallow the G Corporation and make him a laughingstock." I snapped out of my reverie. Victoria had fallen silent, probably asleep, her soft sobs still audible through the phone. I chuckled softly. "Victoria, Sebastian won't wait for you forever. He's already moved far ahead." On a sunny afternoon, Charles and I visited Ethan in the detention center. The physical and mental torment had left him haggard, like a lamp about to be extinguished by a storm. Through the thick, bulletproof glass, Ethan glared at me with venomous eyes. He gritted his teeth and said, "Sebastian, are you here to flaunt your victory?" I chuckled and replied, "Ethan, do you still think I see you as a rival? You're just a pawn." I showed him the photo of Victoria in her mermaid dress at the boarding gate. My people could take this photo of Victoria boarding the plane. If I wanted, I could have stopped her. That day I gave her one last chance. Ethan, as if struck by something, finally realized. He asked, "You leaked the news of your wedding to me on purpose? You lured me back to make me the scapegoat for ruining everything?" He stood up, pounding on the glass, shouting, "You're crazy. You love Victoria, don't you? What do you want?" Seeing Charles behind me, Ethan cursed him too. "And you! If you hadn't provoked me, I wouldn't have wanted to be an actor. Without the entertainment industry, there wouldn't have been so many people there. I wouldn't have committed a crime, wouldn't have been imprisoned, and Victoria wouldn't have found out I was faking my illness. My perfect life was ruined by you two." I sighed and asked, "Why do you still think my goal was Victoria? My target was the Lou Group." Ethan, restrained by the guards, kept cursing. "What does that have to do with me? Why drag me into your rich people's games?" I stood up, staring into his eyes, and said, "When you shamelessly insisted on living in my marital home, when you took my ring without asking, why didn't you question it then? You wanted to join the game." Ethan broke free from the guards, pressing against the glass, shouting, "Sebastian, I'll tell Victoria everything. I will." I stepped back, waved at him with a smile, and hung up the phone. On the way back, Charles asked, "How did you know Victoria and Ethan would fall into the traps you set?" I thought for a moment and replied, "People can never escape their desires." Victoria's life had always been smooth sailing. Ethan was her only setback, and she was bound to be trapped by him. Ethan, who had been abroad for over a decade, never gave up trying to contact Victoria. As long as he had hope, he would cling to her like a lifeline, dragging them both into the abyss. We both fell silent, understanding that we were also caught in the web. With the support of our fathers, I took over the Lou Group, ensuring a smooth transition. The affairs of both groups were too complex, so after thorough deliberation and obtaining shareholder approval, the Lou Group and G Corporation officially merged. The once separate business giants finally became an unshakable behemoth under my leadership. The group thrived under my management, while Victoria lost all her luster. She spent her days in our marital home, cooking dishes I liked and asking if I would come home for dinner. I never returned to that so-called home. Life went on uneventfully until Ethan was released from prison. The final blow came. Victoria, with Ethan in tow, burst into my office. Her eyes were red, and she looked like she was about to break. She stood before me, trembling, trying to reach out to me. She choked out, "Sebastian, tell me that what Ethan said isn't true." Ethan, on the other hand, looked smug. Under Victoria's hopeful gaze, I nodded. What he said is probably true if he didn't exaggerate. Victoria took 2 steps back. Ethan tried to hold her, but she pushed him away. She asked, bewildered, "Sebastian, was it all a lie? The years we spent together, the days you did everything I liked, the times you protected me, were they all lies? You looked so happy when you said you wanted to marry me. Was it all fake? I thought you were the only one who truly cared for me. Why? Why do you have to do this to me too?" I didn't answer her barrage of questions. Instead, I took a document from the cabinet behind me and placed it in front of her. "Victoria, I think this document will give you the answers." Victoria, trembling, picked up the document. As she read its contents, cold sweat dripped down her face. I motioned for Ethan to help her to the sofa and made her a cup of coffee, placing it by her side. "Victoria, let's be honest. The GI Corporation couldn't secure the cooperation with Byron despite all our efforts and couldn't find any breakthrough. The president of Byron is your friend from your studies in the United States. You used Lou Group and another deal with her to indefinitely delay the cooperation with G Corporation. Your goal was to bring down G Corporation, am I right?" I looked at Ethan, who was standing beside us, bewildered. Smiling, I continued, "I should thank Ethan. When you heard he was seriously ill, you couldn't wait to go abroad to see him, even missing our wedding. To appease my father's anger, you had to bring out the contract with Byron. I know Ethan is your first love, but it was Uncle Lou who separated you two. The teenage Sebastian, who always protected you, did nothing wrong. But you took out your frustration at being unable to resist Uncle Lou on me and G Corporation. I once treated you with all my heart, but you calculated every step. If you didn't love me, why did you marry me? Because you needed the G family's support. Now I've fulfilled your dream. The G and Lou families are united under me. We're still married, so it's like you've achieved your dream, right, Victoria?" Victoria, her eyes red, asked, "You didn't love me and knew I was using you. Why did you marry me?" I looked at her, puzzled, as if she were a stranger. "Victoria, is that a question you should ask? You becoming my wife was the biggest help in completing my plan." Victoria was silent for a long time, so long that I almost lost patience. Finally, she stood up, walked to the door, and with her hand on the doorknob, she turned back and said, "Sebastian, I will take back everything that belongs to me." In the following days, Victoria made many efforts but failed. The two groups had already merged, and after 2 years of struggle, she had no leverage left except for a few shares that allowed her to receive dividends. Repeated rejections completely crushed her spirit. She finally became the kind of rich girl she once despised, spending her nights partying and clubbing. On my 25th birthday, Zachary and Charles organized a big party, inviting the second-generation elites of our circle. I lounged on the sofa, letting them laugh and joke around. Zachary, unable to stand it, brought over 10 young models, forcing me to choose one. He grinned and said, 2 or 3 are fine too. I lazily scanned the group and randomly pointed at one. Her, I said. The young model knelt before me, her head lowered, timidly calling me Mr. G. She had a pure appearance and a graceful figure. As she massaged me, I closed my eyes in comfort. Time seemed to stand still until Victoria's angry voice broke the silence. Sebastian, don't forget, I'm still your wife. The young model froze in fear. I patted her hand, signaling her to continue. Opening my eyes, I met Victoria's furious gaze and couldn't help but laugh. Victoria, I promised to marry you, and I did. You're my wife now. You should be happy. But when it comes to feelings, I advise you not to expect too much. You'll never get what you want. Laughter erupted around us. I squinted, as if seeing the boy who had followed Victoria around 10 years ago, finally stopping and smiling at me.